Pakistan says it has launched a military operation against India.
Pakistan has accused India of igniting an inferno in the region.
Tensions between India and Pakistan continue to rise as the two nuclear powers exchange heavy artillery.
US officials have confirmed Pakistan used Chinese J-10 jets to launch missiles.
India is fighting two wars right now. One against Pakistan that's out in the open for the whole world to see, and another hidden, silent conflict with China. You see, just a few days after India retaliated with military strikes against Pakistan's recent horrific terrorist attacks, the Chinese deep state and state media went into overdrive. Within hours of India's airstrikes going public, Chinese social media platforms like Weibo and Baidu exploded with anti-India propaganda. Hashtags like India attacks and hashtag India open fired instantly gained millions of views, deliberately framing India as the aggressor. Chinese influencers and even some official accounts pushed unverified and dramatic stories of fake Pakistani victories and supposed Indian humiliations. Claims went viral that were falsely stating multiple Rafales had been shot down in dogfights. China's puppet media, like Global Times, pushed aggressive op-eds blaming India for the entire crisis, but conveniently skipped mentioning the horrific terrorist attack on India that started it all. Editors even warned India against bullying Pakistan, openly hinting that China might have to teach India a lesson, purposely repeating the exact same phrase China famously used as a threat right before launching the 1962 Sino-Indian War. Meanwhile, some popular Chinese defense commentators went all in and started reposting old clips of PLA tanks and artillery moving towards the Indian border near Tibet. But their captions made it sound like they were fresh deployments happening right now. Even Chinese state TV jumped onto the bandwagon, making routine PLA drills look like serious direct threats aimed straight at India. That the PLA is ready to deal with Indian threats, and that Indian expansionism will not be tolerated. Now, of course, YouTube is not a fan of war-related topics, and CCP bots are not a fan of videos that criticize the CCP. So in this video, we need your help more than ever. If you can hit that like and subscribe button down below, it really does help us out with this YouTube algorithm. Okay, let's start. By expansionism, they're specifically referring to Jammu and Kashmir, an Indian state that is illegally occupied by both Pakistan and China. But the real reason China's getting nervous is because of this one specific area called the Shaksgam Valley. It's part of the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, or the POK, located just north of the Siachen Glacier. You see, back in 1963, Pakistan quietly handed around 2,000 square miles of this vital territory to China through the Sino-Pakistan Agreement, something India has categorically rejected from the start. In fact, just over 1 year after that agreement, India's parliament unanimously passed a resolution clearly stating that the entire region of Jammu and Kashmir, including territories illegally occupied by Pakistan and China, specifically mentioning the Shaksgam Valley and Aksai Chin, is an integral, inseparable part of India. With tensions rising day by day, the possibility of an all-out war is very real. And if war really breaks out, then there's a strong chance that India could reclaim control over the entire POK region from Pakistan. And if that happens, Pakistan itself would likely collapse entirely. This could help Balochistan finally gain its long-awaited freedom, and other provinces would spiral into complete chaos. China absolutely cannot let this scenario happen, because if it does, they're literally doomed. Their trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, China's ambitious plan for global economic dominance, would collapse overnight. Not to mention that China has already poured more than $60 billion into Pakistan through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. They've constructed extensive highways, high-speed railways, power plants, industrial parks, and most importantly, Gwadar Port, a strategic hub providing direct access to the Arabian Sea. The entire purpose behind this massive investment was to secure a reliable trade route, allowing China to bypass the Strait of Malacca. This narrow passage between Malaysia and Indonesia is extremely vulnerable and can easily be blocked off by India, the US, or any other rivals during a conflict. This is exactly why the CCP is desperately trying to de-escalate the situation through diplomatic channels. They understand clearly that if a full-scale war erupts and China doesn't intervene militarily, Pakistan will inevitably fracture. But maybe that's exactly the plan. If Pakistan falls, China immediately has an excuse to step in militarily under the guise of protecting its interests and investments. Either way, For China, whether it's a direct or an even indirect war, it's already an economic death sentence that'll set them back decades. But there's another crucial reason China is terrified. Last month, around April 7th, a rumor began spreading that Apple was planning to shift its entire iPhone production out of China and into India. At first, it seemed fake, but when the CCP dug deeper, they quickly realized that not only was it true, but other global giants like Dell, Google, HP, Walmart, and several others were also planning on doing the same. That one little rumor sent absolute panic through the CCP. And why wouldn't it? We're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars on the line. If you've been keeping up with our videos, you know that China's economy simply cannot survive a blow this massive. So obviously, the CCP has to do something drastic. And that's when they realized that a destabilized India would be much less attractive for these big global companies. Guess what? Within just 2 weeks, on April 22nd, India suffered the deadliest attack in over a decade. Now take a step back and look at all the events. Do you start to see this disturbing pattern? First, India is attacked, and immediately Pakistan-based terror groups openly claim responsibility. India carefully responds with a controlled, precise military strike, deliberately avoiding escalation. But Pakistan doesn't back down. Instead, they dramatically escalate the conflict by launching missiles and hundreds of suicide drones on multiple Indian cities, killing several civilians and leaving dozens injured. That's an open act of war. And now India has no choice but to retaliate and escalate even further. For China, Pakistan was the perfect choice, especially given their decades-long rivalry with India. Plus, everyone knows Pakistan is basically China's pet. Imagine you're Chinese and you've got a pet that you don't particularly like or care about. It's pretty easy to send it off to do your dirty work, like attacking a neighbor you despise, because in the end, your pet takes all the blame, not you. And if anyone thinks this sounds too far-fetched or dramatic, just remember what the CCP has already done to its own citizens. Whether it's the brutal Tiananmen Square massacre, the mass imprisonment and forced labor of millions of Uyghur Muslims, or the systematic disappearance of countless Tibetans. China has shown time and time again that there are no lines they won't cross. For the CCP, companies leaving China isn't just about money. It's about survival. And when survival is on the line, they'll do whatever it takes to protect their grip on global power. Now, after the terror attack, the CCP likely celebrated, thinking their plan worked perfectly. But just 3 days later, Apple stunned them by officially confirming their move to India anyway. Now Apple plans to manufacture a massive $40 billion worth of iPhones in India by 2026. That's around 80% of all iPhones sold in the US market. Now that China's economic game plan has completely fallen apart, their next move could be ruthless and extreme, potentially dragging the world into an all-out war. Now let's break down exactly how China might move against each Indian state, based on decades of think tank research, war games, and geopolitical analysis. Let's start with the obvious hotspot, the icy deserts of Ladakh, specifically the Aksai Chin Plateau, the same piece of land Beijing grabbed back in 1962. This is mainly because Aksai Chin is strategically priceless. You see, this plateau connects directly with Tibet and Xinjiang, and the lifeblood of China's military logistics flows through here, the famous Western Highway, the G219. In a conflict, Chinese troops would likely unleash a classic pincer attack. PLA units could flood from Aksai Chin in the east, while Pakistani forces simultaneously push from Gilgit-Baltistan in the west. The combined assault would pin Indian forces down in Ladakh, cutting them off and putting critical positions around the Siachen Glacier and Karakoram Pass under immediate threat. PLA mountain brigades specialized for high-altitude warfare could exploit key strategic outposts, like Daulat Beg Oldi, India's highest, northernmost airstrip. If this airstrip falls, India's entire access to the strategically crucial subsector north could instantly vanish. And to make things worse, advanced Chinese rocket, artillery, and missile launchers stationed deep in Tibet and Xinjiang could unleash devastating bombardments directly onto Indian supply routes and bases around Leh, crippling India's ability to reinforce its frontline troops. The ultimate goal in Ladakh would be real estate. Beijing wants full control over Aksai Chin, and if possible, they might even grab some more territory south of the current line of actual control. Securing this area would guarantee the safety of their critical highway and also fortify the China-Pakistan economic corridor. It would literally create a land bridge with Pakistan, tightening their strategic grip around India's throat. Most importantly, by launching a massive offensive in Ladakh, China would force India to pull forces away from the Pakistani front, effectively giving their all-weather ally, Pakistan, some desperately needed breathing room. The same thing happened back in the 1965 Indo-Pakistan War. China openly threatened India and moved troops near Sikkim, making India more worried about fighting in a two-front war. Only back then, Beijing stopped short of actually attacking. But today, China's military is far more capable, and that old threat could easily become a reality. And unfortunately for India, the Chinese have been preparing for this exact scenario for decades. Massive infrastructure investments give the PLA a serious mobility advantage across the entire Ladakh front. China built all-weather highways, advanced air bases, and dozens of rapidly deployable, brigade-sized camps along the LAC. Beijing's best bet would be to catch India completely off guard, presenting New Delhi with an unavoidable situation before it even realizes what's happening. In fact, many analysts openly warn that between 2025 and 2030, China holds a dangerous advantage over India, a window of opportunity where their local military edge might actually be decisive enough to guarantee victory. But it's not nearly as easy as it sounds. On paper, sure, China has the numbers. But in reality, warfare rarely follows neat predictions. 100 things could go disastrously wrong for Beijing. A perfect example of this is the ongoing war between mighty Russia and tiny Ukraine. It's been 3 years into this invasion, and even today the Russian military is stuck in a brutal and embarrassing stalemate. China could face the exact same fate, or even worse. For starters, fighting at altitudes over 14,000 feet is an absolute nightmare. Even China's highly trained mountain units aren't immune to altitude sickness, extreme weather, and logistical nightmares. And Indian soldiers aren't rookies. They've spent decades mastering this terrain. Ladakh isn't some easy battleground. It's literally one of the toughest terrains on the planet. And India has learned a thing or two from previous skirmishes. They've massively improved infrastructure, bolstered their mountain warfare training, and stocked advanced weaponry exactly for a scenario like this. Moreover, if China openly involves itself in a war against India, they're essentially gambling on a geopolitical powder keg. India isn't Ukraine. It's a nuclear-armed giant with powerful friends and strong diplomatic ties around the world. Countries like the United States, Japan, Australia, France, and the UK have openly deepened military and strategic ties with India specifically to counter Chinese aggression. China's involvement in an all-out war could immediately trigger a massive international backlash. Economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation, arms supplies pouring into India from the West, you name it. Suddenly, China would find itself completely isolated on the global stage. And if China is seen actively ganging up with Pakistan to attack India, other regional powers like Australia, Japan, and Southeast Asian countries, who are already uneasy about China's aggressive moves in the South China Sea, would quickly rally behind India. You could realistically end up with an Asia-wide anti-China alliance forming practically overnight. But remember, this isn't just Ladakh we're talking about. There are still 2 other critical flashpoints that could completely change the game, each even more dangerous than the last. If Indian forces get stretched thin in Ladakh, Beijing's other offensive would come from the eastern Himalayas. We're talking about the McMahon Line, the border separating China from Arunachal Pradesh, a state Beijing deliberately labels South Tibet and stubbornly claims as its own territory. The main focus of the area would be the Tawang sector, because it's the birthplace of the Dalai Lama. Capturing it wouldn't just hand Beijing massive diplomatic leverage, it'd also help them tighten control over the restless Tibetan population. On top of that, controlling Tawang means militarily outflanking India's entire eastern defensive line, capturing critical high-altitude peaks that overlook the lush, strategic Brahmaputra Valley below. And this wouldn't even be the first time. Back in 1962, China stormed through the same area. Chinese forces managed to capture Tawang at shocking speed. They held it for nearly a month before withdrawing. In an all-out conflict scenario, China would do the same. Simultaneously, Chinese troops could also launch coordinated assaults further east into places like Dibang and the Lohit Valley sectors. By forcing India's army to guard nearly 1,100 kilometers of difficult border terrain simultaneously, China makes it impossible for Indian forces to mass effectively elsewhere. Instead, Indian defenses would quickly get diluted and stretched dangerously thin. If China manages even a limited, successful incursion into Arunachal, they'd gain a devastating geopolitical bargaining chip. Imagine Beijing warning they'd withdraw from Arunachal, but only if India permanently drops its claims on Aksai Chin. But, just like in Ladakh, it's not that easy. Sure, China could easily invade Arunachal back in 1962, but back then, India was unprepared, ill-equipped, and completely caught by surprise. Today, things look entirely different. Not only are they better armed, but also battle-tested, extensively trained in jungle and mountain warfare, and dug deep into strong defense positions built up over the decades. And remember, Arunachal is thick, dense forests, steep mountains, torrential rivers, and relentless rain. It's an absolute nightmare, even for the best equipped armies. Chinese troops would quickly find themselves bogged down, struggling through muddy jungle trails, constantly vulnerable to sudden ambushes from well-hidden, well-prepared Indian units. Add to that the logistical nightmare of resupplying troops hundreds of kilometers away from China's nearest reliable bases, through some of the harshest terrain imaginable. YouTube just dropped a mind-boggling announcement. It is paying creators $64 million per day. Why? Well, because YouTube doesn't have enough creators. That is why you see videos on your homepage that have less than 1,000 views, like this one. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everyone should start a channel, but if you have ever wondered about starting a YouTube channel, or a faceless YouTube channel like this one, well, now's the perfect time. YouTube is paying creators millions every day, and it's pushing newer, smaller channels now more than ever. But I'm sure many of you have questions on how to get started and how to grow a channel. We get questions in our email all the time from some of you guys. So that's why we've decided to put all of our YouTube advice into one training bootcamp for the low, low price of completely free. So, if you're someone interested in starting your own YouTube channel, you can sign up for this bootcamp by clicking on the link in the description or on the screen. Sign up now because, unfortunately, unlike YouTube videos, the bootcamp is like a Zoom call, so it's limited to just 100 people. Okay, let's get back to the video. Speaking of logistics, India has learned its lessons the hard way. Over the past decade, India has rapidly boosted its infrastructure along the eastern border. Brand new airfields, fortified bases, hardened bunkers, and multiple new access roads are specifically designed to rush reinforcements and critical supplies exactly where they're needed, exactly when they're needed. And of course, don't forget about the massive international backlash. Once again, Beijing would risk getting bogged down in a messy, costly stalemate. Just ask Russia how well that's going for them. Now we're onto perhaps the single most dangerous region of them all, a choke point so vulnerable that if China targets it, India could literally be sliced apart. I'm talking about the Siliguri corridor, better known as the Chicken's Neck. And here's exactly where China might unleash its secret weapon, its proxy and Pakistan's own offspring, Bangladesh. This narrow stretch of land in India's northeast, barely 20 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, is the only physical land connection between mainland India and the 7 northeastern states. Pinch this corridor shut, and India's entire northeast could be instantly isolated. China knows exactly how vulnerable this Chicken's Neck corridor is. And now, with recent major political shifts inside of Bangladesh, the odds have tilted dramatically and dangerously in China's favor. Big time. For years under Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh walked a careful line between India and China. But after Hasina's regime was overthrown, Dhaka's new leadership quickly began cozying up openly to Beijing. Massive Chinese investments have poured into Bangladeshi infrastructure, ports, bridges, even a revamped military-grade airfield in La Molinat, barely 10 kilometers from India's border. No wonder alarm bells are going off in New Delhi. With Bangladesh now openly courting China's military and political backing, India faces a chilling nightmare. A hostile nation right on its eastern doorstep, perfectly positioned to team up with China in an all-out war. But how exactly would China exploit this volatile situation? Well, for starters, Bangladesh could simply allow Chinese surveillance teams or special forces to position themselves covertly right next to Indian territory. A small Chinese electronic surveillance outpost or surface-to-air missile battery placed discreetly in northwestern Bangladesh could threaten the entire Indian airspace over the corridor, creating a whole new war front without firing a single conventional shot. China could also deliberately reignite insurgencies across India's northeast. Remember, this region has a long history of insurgent groups, many previously supported or sheltered by elements within Bangladesh and Myanmar. In a conflict scenario, China could secretly funnel weapons, cash, and intelligence to rebel groups, instructing them to sabotage key railways, roads, bridges, and convoys supplying the front lines. This would multiply India's chaos, forcing Delhi to divert precious soldiers to internal security missions rather than frontline combat. Finally, let's not forget the northern pincer. Back in 2017, Chinese road building in Doklam, near Bhutan's Tri Junction, led to a tense standoff precisely because it would have given China a direct line of sight and access route straight down to the Chicken's Neck. Imagine if the Chinese tried to do the same. Only this, Indian forces would be focused on 2 fronts, Pakistan and Bangladesh. But at the same time, the chicken's neck isn't nearly as vulnerable as it once was. India has spent decades turning this choke point into an absolute fortress. First off, Indian forces have rapidly strengthened their air defenses, deploying advanced Russian-made S-400 missile systems all along the corridor. These are the same air defense systems you've probably seen in action in videos online, the same systems that have shielded Indian cities, knocking down enemy missiles and drones effortlessly, and saving hundreds if not thousands of civilian lives on India's side. India has also stationed squadrons of cutting-edge Rafale fighter jets at the nearby airbase. These Rafales are built specifically for missions in and around the chicken's neck. Any Chinese or Bangladeshi air threat approaching the corridor would face immediate interception by these advanced fighter jets. On the ground, the Indian Army has massively reinforced troop presence along the entire region, placing elite infantry, armored brigades, and artillery units along the northern border and the Bangladeshi frontier. New armored battalions, heavy artillery, tanks, and hundreds of armored vehicles now stand ready to rapidly respond to threats from either direction. But even with all that said, China has plenty more reasons to think twice before getting involved. They know that there's zero guarantee they'd secure a quick, easy victory. After recent border clashes, China knows firsthand just how fiercely Indian soldiers will defend every single inch of their motherland. A drawn-out war in the brutal Himalayan terrain could easily bog down Chinese troops far from their supply bases, exactly like Russia got stuck in Ukraine. A dragged-out stalemate, or worse, a humiliating bloody defeat, would completely shatter China's carefully cultivated image of strength, damaging its global prestige for decades. Diplomatically, the moment China invades India, it immediately becomes the world's biggest villain. Instantly, everyone would see Beijing as the aggressor, leading straight to the UN condemnations. And given an opportunity like this, Trump would be a nightmare for China. Trump would use it as the perfect excuse to rain down thousands of brutal sanctions on China. If China thinks tariffs and trade wars are painful right now, just wait until they experience full-on international isolation. Overnight, China would transform itself into an international pariah, triggering sanctions hell that could cripple its economy for generations. Then, of course, there's the nuclear factor, which everyone conveniently tries to ignore. Remember, India, China, and Pakistan are all nuclear-armed nations. Beijing might think it can carefully manage and keep the conflict strictly conventional, safely below the nuclear threshold. After all, both India and China officially claim no first-use nuclear policies, keeping their nukes purely as last-resort weapons. But Pakistan's nuclear strategy is intentionally vague, unpredictable, and reckless. Any scenario that threatens India's very existence immediately raises the terrifying prospect of nuclear escalation. Chinese military planners would have to be incredibly careful. They might avoid directly capturing major Indian cities or pushing too far into clearly disputed Indian territory, desperately trying to frame their invasion as a sort of limited defensive intervention. Maybe they'd even spin it globally as restoring regional stability, pretending they're just preventing India from wiping out Pakistan. Though, let's be real, no one on Earth would buy that excuse. But regardless of how carefully China tries to control the situation, they'd constantly be haunted by the fact that one wrong move, just one small miscalculation, could trigger a catastrophic nuclear war. And lastly, economically speaking, this war would absolutely devastate China, possibly even more than India. Sure, India's economy is smaller, but it's still one of China's largest trade partners. With over $100 billion in annual bilateral trade at stake, any direct war means those trade ties vanish overnight. Beyond just losing direct trade, India would immediately and permanently align itself with the West, joining every possible economic blockade, international sanction, and tech decoupling initiative already gaining momentum against China. International investors would instantly panic, fleeing the entire region. Shipping insurance rates through critical maritime routes like the Indian Ocean would skyrocket. Worst of all, China's lifeline, the crucial energy imports it desperately relies on, could quickly come under threat as the US and its allies impose naval blockades around Chinese waters. Beijing might gamble, hoping for a quick victory and minimal economic damage. But if the conflict drags on for weeks or months, China faces complete economic strangulation. And the worst part, all of this economic devastation could happen without a single enemy bullet ever landing on Chinese soil. Believe me, that's exactly the kind of nightmare scenario Chinese leaders genuinely lose sleep over. Thanks for watching.